All right, chapter 13, Alma. The days that December were long and cold. We'd been keeping our thermostat at 80 degrees, but then our first heating bill arrived in the amount of $304.52, which made me cry when I saw it and made Arturo shred the paper into bits the size of confetti. Neither of us needed to say out loud that we couldn't pay it. We turned the heat down to 60 after that and huddled by the radiators for warmth. We wrapped the blankets around our shoulders, pinching them closed in our fists, and wore extra pairs of socks. I tied a scarf over my head, even though Arturo said it made me look like a terrorist. The wind sliced through the edges of the old loose windows and shuttled cold air into our bedroom. Arturo tried to smooth caulk into the crevices, but the caulk cracked when it dried. He taped rags around the window casings, but it was a little help. My body isn't made for this winter, I told Arturo, who laughed the first time I said it and frowned when I repeated it myself. Again, a few days later, we shouldn't complain, he said. So I did my best to focus on the positive. Mirabelle had left twice since the first time, and it seemed to me that she was able to remember more on her own now, too. She still relied on her notebook, but during Mass, for example, she knew when to kneel and when to stand, when to go up for communion, and how to find her way back to our seat afterwards. The reports from school were encouraging, too. The most recent one had said, Mirabelle speaks with increasing frequency, both to the reader and to the aide, although only in Spanish. She has begun to respond to questions, although at times her response is inconsistent with the question asked. Both in voluntary speech and in replies, she has begun to modulate her voice and be more expressive. Even so, I was a worrier by nature, and I couldn't escape the feeling that anything could happen to her at any time, as if because something terrible had happened to her once, there was more of a possibility that something terrible would happen to her again. Or maybe it was merely that I understood how vulnerable she was in a way I hadn't before. I understood how easily and how quickly things could be snatched away. Every school morning, I stood outside and waited for the bus with her. Every afternoon, I met her again in the same spot. Mirabelle had developed a sort of friendship with Mayor Toro, which seemed like one more way that she was making progress. He was her first friend since the accident, but I told her that she and Mayor were only allowed to spend time together under supervision, either at our apartment or at the Toros. About that, I was firm. The Toro's front door was no more than 10 meters from ours, down on the first floor, but I stood outside and watched Mirabelle walk the distance, waiting for her to go inside before I did. When it was time for her to come home, I watched her again. I was making enchiladas de carne one day with some near expired brisket I had found on clearance at the meat market. I was humming to myself a song my mother used to sing me when I was a girl. I washed the back pasilla chilies off my hands, patting them dry against my pants, and glimpsed the clock, which read just past 5. My heart leapt. How had it gotten so late? Mirabelle should have been home by then. Quickly, I walked to the door and opened it, expecting to see her mounting the stairs, walking towards me. But all I saw was the cracked asphalt and the faded white paint lines in the empty parking lot. Where was she? Was she still at the Toros? I closed the door behind me, stepped outside, and started toward the Toro's door. When I got to the bottom of the stairs, I heard laughter. Not Mirabelle's, but someone's, coming from around the side of the building. And then I heard a boy's voice. I crept toward it. Mirabelle, I called. No one answered. Mirabelle, I said louder, inching my way forward. I kicked something and looked down to see Mirabelle's sunglasses on the ground. Unease rose beneath my breastbone. I picked up the sunglasses and kept walking, listening for her, but everything was quiet now. And then, as I turned the corner, I saw her. Her back was against the cinder block wall, and her hands were up over her head. A boy! The boy from the gas station! I recognized him instantly, was holding her wrists in place, staring at her. Her shirt was bunched up under her armpits, exposing her white cotton bra. Her head was turned to the side and her eyes squeezed shut. I screamed. The boy startled and spun his head around. Get away from her, I yelled. I raced to wedge myself between them, yanking Mirabelle's shirt down, shielding her with my body. The boy said something in English, something unintelligible to me, but I could hear the indignation in his tone. Without thinking, I turned and spat in his face, grabbed my arm, digging his nails into my. I grabbed my arm, digging his nails into my. He grabbed my arm, digging his nails into my skin. Go, Mirabelle! I shrieked. Go to the apartment! But she didn't move. She was mute and immobile, a tree rooted in place. Go, I said, tearing myself away from the boy, and then I ran, dragging Mirabelle with me to the front of the building, back up the staircase, and into the apartment, where I locked the door behind us, gasping and trying to blink away the blinding white light of panic. What's wrong? Arturo asked that night while we sat on the kitchen table, the ridiculous stolen kitchen table, drinking manzanilla tea. We did most nights after Mirabelle went to bed. I looked at him, startled, as if he had woken me from a dream. What do you mean? You're so quiet, he said. I was thinking, about what? I hadn't told him what had happened. I wasn't going to tell him. I didn't want to know that I had failed Mirabelle again. Besides, she was okay. I had asked her what the boy had done, if he had kissed her, if he had touched her, if he had hurt her. She shook her head no. He had pushed her against the wall. He was going to do something, that was clear. But I had gotten there in time, and when I inspected her, examining every visible part of her body, there was no scratches, no marks of any kind. She's okay, I told myself, with a certain strange relief. I tried to focus on that instead of on the other part of me that chimed this time. Alma, Arturo prodded. I was thinking about Mirabelle, I said. I felt like a way of it felt like a way of telling the truth. At the sound of her name he softened. She's doing better, no? The reports from school. Yes. But you're worried, Arturo asked. I attempted a smile. No. You're worried about something. I stared at him and shook my head lightly. Yes, you are. You worry about everything. You're a true Mexicana, a fatalist. As if you don't worry about things. Of course, but I've been thinking, what if God wants us to be happy? What if there's nothing else around the bend? What if all our unhappiness is in the past and from here on out we get an uncomplicated life? Some people get that, you know. Why shouldn't it be us? I flattened my hand against the table, spreading my fingers out. It was a lovely thought, but hearing Arturo's optimism bubble to the surface, hearing the rawness of it, was excruciating. You have to think like a gringa now, Arturo said. You have to believe that you're entitled to happiness. I took a small sip of tea, feeling the warmth of it bloom in my mouth. Outside, the wind howled and sent the tops of the leafless trees casting back and forth in the light. Soon it would be Christmas, and all at once I wished that we were back in Pátzcuaro, where Christmases were warm and thick with the scent of cinnamon, where piñatas filled with oranges and sugar canes hung from the rafters, and there were children paraded from the streets carrying paper farolitos in their small hands. I wished we were anywhere but here. Geographically, emotionally, I wish our life was different, but that it was what it used to be. 2 years ago, only 6 months before the accident, my parents had come over for Christmas Eve dinner, bringing Mirabelle a dress from Diseño y Artesanía. Uh, Artesania. My mother insisted they wanted to give it to her. Mirabelle had made the bun, buñe, this word, buñuelos that year because at 14 she wanted to prove her independence and her capabilities. She first claimed she wanted to make tamales and revolito de romeritos, but I argued they were too complicated. Besides, they were the main part of the meal. I thought, if they don't turn out, what will we eat? I told her, maybe you can make the buñuelos. Buñuelos had what? Flour, sugar, salt, eggs, milk, butter, baking powder, cinnamon? No more, no less. How bad could they be? Early in the morning, she got out a bowl and fork. What are you doing? I asked. I'm making my buñuelos. Already? They don't take more than a half hour to prepare. I know. Do you know that it's 8:30 in the morning? Yep. But we're not eating them until tonight. Mommy, she said, putting her hand on her hip. Mirabelle, I said, putting my hand on my hip the same way. She rolled her eyes. Come back around 6, I said, shooing her out of the kitchen. I'll be finished by then. You can have the kitchen to yourself. At 6 on the dot, she came back and announced, Buñuelo time. I was wiping down the counter. My food was ready, heaped in bowls that I'd covered with foil and put in the refrigerator. Do you want my help? I asked. You told me I could make them. You can. I'm just asking if you want help. I knew the answer, though, when she pulled out a bowl, set it on the counter, and lined up her ingredients next to it. So you know where everything is? I asked, before I left her alone. Mammy, Mommy, she said, I live here. I've lived here all my life. That doesn't help your father, I said. Try asking him where anything is. Mirabelle dipped a finger in the sugar and licked it. Okay, I said, call if you need anything. From the next room, I could hear her humming as she measured and poured and stirred. I heard drawers opening and closing, the clank of spoons against the inside of the bowls. I heard the dough hit the counter and her little grunts as she kneaded it and rolled it out. I was sewing a button onto one of Arturo's work shirts when she walked out with flour on her chin. Are they done? I asked. She sat next to me and laid her floured hand on top of my knee. It's going well, she said solemnly, as if she were a doctor who had emerged from the operating room to deliver an update. She disappeared again. I heard the crackle of the oil as it heated and the sighing sizzle that as she dropped the flattened discs of dough in one by one. She's doing it, I thought. My girl. My parents came over for dinner that night, and we ate, flushed with the merriment of the season. After everyone was finished, Mirabelle hurried into the kitchen where her buñuelos waited on an oval platter covered by a dish towel. She brought them out proudly and, like a perfect hostess, carried the plate around, holding it over each person's shoulder while they helped themselves to the desserts. The buñuelos were golden brown, and the cinnamon Mirabelle had sprinkled on the top of each while they were still warm had melted into the dough like tiny amber crystals. You made these? Arturo asked in disbelief. All by myself, Mirabelle said. Arturo looked at me. She did, I confirmed. They look wonderful, my mother said. And I saw Mirabelle look over all of us, her face ripe with pride. I saw her growing up before me. I saw the family she would have one day and the food she would make for them. I saw her entire life in front of her, waiting.